Hello and welcome back to CRJ 100. Today we're going to talk about one of my personal favorite topics in the world of criminal justice, and that is why people commit crimes. What would make a seemingly perfectly normal individual decide to go across the hall one day, kill and mutilate the body of their neighbor? Why would someone who has spent their whole life doing morally upstanding things decide one day to start going out and engaging in fraudulent activities? Well, these are the questions we have to ask in the field of criminal justice if we really want to do a good job in protecting our communities. If we want prevention programs and rehabilitation programs that help people already in the system not commit future crimes, then we really need to understand why they're committing crimes in the first place, because crimes are really just a symptom of a deeper rooted problem. A good analogy of this is today if you start to go home and your car won't start, or you notice a funny noise, you might take your car to a mechanic. And when you get there, hopefully the mechanic won't just deal with the symptom, the noise or the not starting, and just get it started enough for you to get home, but hopefully they'll run diagnostics. They'll try to determine what's causing that noise or that problem with starting your car to occur. Once that's fixed, the symptom of the car not starting and the funny noise goes away. Same thing's true in the medical field. If I decide to go to the doctor tomorrow because I have a pain in some part of my body, hopefully my doctor won't just address the symptom, the pain, but they'll run some tests. They'll try to figure out what underlying condition is causing me to feel my discomfort or pain. And then they'll treat that and my discomfort or pain will go away. Same's true in the field of criminal justice. If we really want to prevent people from committing crimes and we really want to help people who are already committing crimes rehabilitate and become upstanding individuals, then we really need to understand the deep-seated root causes that are causing people to commit crimes in the first place. Because until we address those, we're just spinning our wheels and we're just addressing symptoms. Today we're going to talk about several theories related to this area. We're not going to spend any time going into any detail in any of these theories, as this is just an intro to criminal justice course. Our earliest explanations for criminal behavior are really in the realm of spiritualistic explanations. The idea that the devil made me do it or some supernatural force entered me and forced me to commit these very violent crimes. After all, if we're a hunter-gatherer civilization or a small, close-knit community, I know everybody knows me. We're related in a lot of cases to a lot of the people in the community. It becomes very difficult for me to believe that someone who I know and respect would be capable of killing children and cannibalizing them in our community. And so if that type of behavior or something very violent or very destructive happens in our community, that's beyond the realm of humanity. That's not something that humans are supposed to be able to do. There must be something wrong with that person that would allow them to do that type of behavior. To even think about it, fathom it, plan it out, commit it, or enjoy it, or any step therein, there must be something really wrong with this individual. It's not human. It's beyond the scope of humanity. And if you think about it, these type of explanations really make sense, because a lot of natural behaviors and things that we know scientifically how they work now were explained through spiritualistic and supernatural forces. Think about things like if there's pestilence in the community, must be a supernatural cause. If there's disease in our community, something supernatural must be afoot. And so if these supernatural forces are always in play in our lives, and these individuals are doing things that's completely against human nature, then there must be something that's entered them that's allowed them to engage in this behavior, maybe even enjoy it. And so we looked at explanations like witchcraft. If there's a lot of bad, really negative things happening in our community, it might be them witches on the prowling in. And so in Europe and in Massachusetts, we've seen witch trials where people were hung, burned at the stake, executed for being witches. Now, how do I prove you're a witch? Well, there's certain physiological signs I can look for, certain marks on the body, things like that, some psychological or sociological characteristics. But really, if I want to prove that you are a witch, I need a confession. And so if I'm sure you're a witch and I'm sure you're engaging in these behaviors that are so destructive to our community and you're causing our community all this pain, I have to get it to stop. The only way to stop it is to get you to confess. I'm sure you did it. Then that opens the door to some pretty extreme ways of getting you to confess, through torture and things like that. And what we know is through these trials, a lot of witches, or a lot of accused witches, were tortured and forced to confess to things that they didn't do just to get the torture to stop. We also see in the Middle Ages in Europe, people being tried for werewolfism. Basically the same idea. You made a pact with the devil. And in that pact, the devil gave you certain supernatural abilities, whether that be witchcraft or being able to become a werewolf. And in that exchange, you sell your soul and you give up a part of your humanity. And so now all of a sudden you're able to engage in these behaviors and maybe even like them because you don't have a soul. You're not like the rest of us anymore. Your humanity has been diminished, and these things become possible. Well, how do we prove you're a werewolf? Some of the same ways we prove that you're a witch. Now, I doubt we killed and executed a whole lot of witches or a whole lot of werewolves through this process, but this is a very cautionary tale of just how theory drives policy. It became okay in these societies to engage in this type of behavior, to weed out the witches and weed out the werewolves, because that's how you were going to make your community safer, and it's the only way you could protect the innocent people in your communities. As we moved into a more scientific society, from a more spiritualistic, superstitious society, we began to look to science to explain a lot of things going on in the world around us. And we looked to it not just to explain phenomenon like the stars or that the planets round, but also in trying to understand human behavior and what would make somebody do something so horrific to someone else. The idea was still there that there's something wrong with these people, okay? They're not like us. They're thinking about things that normal people don't think about. They're acting in ways normal people don't act, and what they're doing is just inhuman. Now, we know it's not the devil that's making them do it. So what is it about those people that make them so fundamentally different than all the rest of us? Well, we looked to science to explain that, and one of the most important people in this area was a fellow by the name of Cesar Lombroso. Now, Lombroso is known as the father of modern criminology, not because we believe what he espoused to be true. As a matter of fact, most of his theories have been disproven at this point. But he was the first person to try to apply scientific principles to the study of criminal behavior. And he was a doctor during a wartime, and he would have people come across his desks, victims of the violence of the war. And he did autopsies on these bodies, and what he noticed was that people who were violent, were criminal, maybe not following social norms, typically had certain traits that were inconsistent with people who were more law-abiding and more socially acceptable individuals. He called these things atavistic traits, things like a unibrow, a palmar crease that doesn't break, goes straight across. If you had one or two of these atavistic traits, it really wasn't a big deal. If you had three or more, though, it may be a sign that you were in for some real trouble. He really was a fan of Darwinism and the idea that animals evolve and adapt to their environment, and that's how animals grow, that's how new species is born, and all the rest. And he thought the same principles should be applied to criminal justice in the study of why people commit crimes. His theory was basically that through the course of human evolution, sometimes a mistake happens, and a baby's born that is a throwback to an earlier stage in the evolution of humanity. And so you might have a baby born that's actually a Neanderthal. And if you put a Neanderthal loose in the middle of Times Square, he's not going to act like everybody else in the community. He's not capable of that. He's a Neanderthal. He's going to act out violently, he's going to act out impulsively, he's not going to follow rules, and he's going to cause problems. And it's not his fault. It's just who he is. If I release a lion in the middle of Times Square and he eats 3 people, well, that's what lions do. And so we can't blame the lion. The same thing is true when we're talking about Neanderthals in modern society. We can't blame the Neanderthal. Now, one of the problems that becomes apparent if we follow this line of logic is that we can't prevent people from committing crimes, because how do I prevent you from being a Neanderthal? We can't rehabilitate you, because how do I rehabilitate a Neanderthal? No matter what I do to that lion's going to be a lion. No matter what I do to that Neanderthal, its heart, it's going to be a Neanderthal. It's not going to be capable of functioning in a sophisticated society like the rest of us. And so there's only 2 options left to have. We either lock them up forever, or we execute them. Now, along these same lines of reason, other areas of thought came up, things like phrenology, the idea we can study the shape and size of your head and tell stuff about your personality characteristics and your propensity for criminal behavior. Things like the studies of the glutes and different people that looked at body structure, and I could tell based on your body shape what type of person you were, what type of traits you had, whether or not you were more prone to certain types of criminal behavior or another. Things like if you're a skinny, small person, you're more timid, more shy. You are the type of person who's very smart, so more likely to engage in fraudulent behavior, not just because you're smart and can do that, but because you also don't like the conflict or the one-on-one confrontation of other types of crimes. You want some distance between you and the victim. A person who's big and strong might not be as bright, may use intimidation to get what they want, be very violent. Now we know, again, just like with other early biological theories, we know these things aren't true, but they do inform how we engage in the practice of dealing with criminals in our criminal justice system. Also, they create another danger in that if you have this group of individuals who, through no fault of their own, just can't get with society, then if society wants to move forward, you can use these theories to justify a lot of heinous acts and a lot of evil you might commit on other people. And unfortunately, these theories have been used to do that in the past. We do have a new school of biological criminology, though, that's came about because of new brain scan technology, where people like Dr. Adrian Rain and Dr. James Fallon will take scans of psychopaths, sociopaths, and compare those to the brain scans of non-psycho and sociopaths. And what they found, one interesting finding, is that people who are psychopaths often have a disconnect between this area of the brain, which is called the prefrontal cortical area of the brain. This is the area of the brain engaged in higher learning, reasoning, impulse control, things like that. And the limbic structure is the more emotional parts of your brain. Now, the limbic system also houses an area called the amygdala, which deals with fear and anxiety. When there's a disconnect between these two regions, you may act more impulsively because your prefrontal cortical area doesn't have an ability to catch your immediate impulses quickly. And so you're going to act out more violently. You're going to act out more emotionally. You're going to act out without strong impulse control telling you that this is not a good idea, a good way to act. The next group of theories we're going to talk about are psychological theories of criminal behavior. These theories are largely based on the idea that what's going on in your brain and your mind has a lot to do with the behaviors that you're going to exhibit. We're going to start with psychoanalytic theory, Freudian psychology. Freud believed that your psyche is basically made up of three components. Your id, which you have from the time you were born. It's your basic instincts. Your need for food, your need to survive. It's I want what I want when I want it. You're not interested in other people's feelings. You're not interested in impulse control. You're just interested in getting your needs met. If you think about an infant, they're not really worried about how many hours of sleep you got when they cry in the middle of the night and want a bottle. They just want what they want when they want it. Your superego is made up of all the morals and all the values and all the ethics that you're taught from the time you were born. And your superego internalizes all those and wants you to operate in a completely moral, completely ethical fashion all the time, to adhere to all these codes with perfection. The ego is basically the referee between these two. And it tries to make peace. It tries to say, all right, we need to get the needs met of the id, but we need to do it in a way that is consistent with what we've been taught in our superego. If a person has an overdeveloped id or an underdeveloped ego, they may act out impulsively. They may not be concerned about other people's feelings. They may just want what they want when they want it, even when they're an adult. And as a matter of fact, if you work in correctional institutions, you see a lot of this I want what I want when I want it mentality. Why should I work 20 years, put back, save, make payments for something that I can own in a month of hustling on the street? I want what I want when I want it. A person who has an overdeveloped superego or underdeveloped ego may engage in things like perfectionism, feeling like they have to be perfect all the time. It causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress that can cause a lot of problems as well. A healthy person has a good balance between these three, and they're able to navigate getting what the id needs under the world of what you've learned to be proper ways to act and to interact in society. Now, most of what's going on in your brain you're not aware of. Most of the stuff going on in your brain operates in your subconscious. But your subconscious has a lot to play in the behaviors and the way you think about things and your feelings and emotions in the conscious world. So, for instance, if I am in a stage of development where I can't handle the fact that I'm being sexually abused every day as a 5-year-old, I may repress that into my subconscious, but it doesn't go away. It causes me anxiety. It causes me fear that I can't understand. I don't understand where it comes from. Now, Freud believed we had an amazing ability to heal from almost anything, but we have to know what it is we're healing from. And so the job of a psychologist from a psychoanalytic perspective is to do things like word association, ink blot, to try to trick your subconscious into letting little things slip that will give the psychologist or psychiatrist the ability to interpret what it is going on in your subconscious, bring it to your reality so that you can work through it. Freud also believed that there was a part of the human condition that motivates them and pushes them towards self-destruction. And if not kept in check, people will destroy themselves and humanity. That there's a self-destruct mechanism within individuals. And that society needs to do things to rein that in, such as create socially acceptable ways to express violence. Things like football, UFC fighting, those types of things. Because if we don't allow pro-social vents to this drive, it will show up in unanticipated and undesirable ways. Behaviorism is based on the idea that we are like every other animal. We learn and we act in the same ways as every other animal. And so how one animal learns is the same way that we learn. There's 2 different ways learning takes place according to behavioralists. The first one is classical conditioning. This is the idea that over time, 2 stimuli can be paired and create a conditioned response. So, for instance, Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov conducted an experiment where he fed his dogs, and every time he fed them, he rang a bell. After, the dogs would come in, they'd be salivating, they'd be excited to get their food. After a while, he quit bringing in the food and just kept ringing the bell, and he learned that that was enough to get the dogs to salivate in anticipation of getting the food. And so they learned to pair those types of stimuli together. How does that apply to criminal behavior? Well, if you have a conditioned response between 2 stimuli that causes you to act out violently, that can contribute to criminal behavior. So, for instance, let's say you grew up in an abusive home and you learn to associate certain sociological environmental cues with abuse about to take place. You may become very defensive, very violent when those social cues appear again because you've created that paired stimuli and that conditioned response. The other way that we learn is through operant conditioning. The idea that people learn through a system of rewards and punishments. If you want people to act a certain way, you reward them for acting that way. If you want people to not act in a certain way, you punish them for acting a certain way. This is a practice we see in parenting all the time. We reward our children for getting good grades and doing things that we want them to do to be successful in life. And we punish things that we know will be socially unacceptable and may get them into trouble in the future. We see the same thing play out in what we call a token economy in juvenile justice centers across the country, where for good behavior they're rewarded with a certain amount of tokens, and they can use those tokens to then buy certain rewards, maybe pizza on Friday or extra TV hours or whatever it is. And that reward helps to encourage pro-social behavior. We know that rewards work better than punishments and that they're much more effective. Trait theory is basically built on the idea that people have certain traits that are with them very early in life and continue throughout their life course. They don't change. As you experience new things happen to you, these traits stay pretty consistent throughout your life course. If it's a trait like acting out aggressively, low impulse control, that could cause you problems in the legal system. If it's traits that make you more pro-social, then that may insulate you from criminal behavior. Cognitive psychology basically espouses the idea that the way you think about the world says a lot about the way you're going to interact with the world and the behaviors we're going to see you engage in. And so if you're a glass half empty person, you're going to act very differently than a glass half full person. If you're a person who sees yourself as a very confident, a very capable person, a person who is in complete control of their life, you're going to act in a very different way than a person with low self-esteem. You feel like that you're incapable of controlling your own life and you're kind of just along for the ride. Take, for example, an inmate. We do a lot of educational programs in corrections. And we give them these degrees and these certificates and this great training, and then we put them back out there in the world. And the idea is that now they'll have more options and they won't revert back to criminal behavior. But we haven't changed the way they think about the world. So take, for instance, myself. If I was to lose my job tomorrow, I would go out and look for another job. I would maybe go out and try to get some new skills to make myself more employable. I would look for social programs that would help me stay on my feet until I could find a new job. And I would see myself as being able to maybe even come back stronger and see this maybe as an opportunity in the future. A person who is released from prison with this new certificate, this new degree, may get a job for a little while. They may lose that job and say, well, I tried it. I did it the way that I was supposed to do it. It didn't work out. I'm going to go back. I got a family to feed. I'm going to go back to selling drugs or whatever it was that got me in the correctional system in the first place. The first school of thought in this area is the classical school. This is the brain work of Cesar Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham, and is based strongly on the idea of utilitarianism. The idea that people will do what causes them the most pleasure and avoids the most pain. This informs every decision you make. Every decision is based on this basic calculus. If a decision is going to cause you more pleasure and avoid pain, that's the decision you're going to go with in every instance. It's human nature to do so. We're all basically slaves to this calculus. With that said, if we're going to deal with criminal behavior, we need to figure out ways to make the rewards of criminal behavior less and the pain associated with engaging in criminal behavior more pronounced. So the first thing that comes to your mind is, well, let's just increase punishments to the point that they're out of control and people will be overwhelmed with the pain associated with committing a certain crime, and it'll take away all pleasure related to that crime because you'll be so afraid of being caught by someone in the criminal justice system. Jeremy Bentham said this isn't the way we should operate. Because if you push people too far, if you push them beyond the limits, if you tyrannize people, then they stand up in revolt, and the laws are meaningless, and more violence will ensue. As a matter of fact, Jeremy Bentham went on to say that any punishment beyond the point that is just enough to outweigh the pleasure associated with the act that you're criminalizing is tyranny and should not be acceptable. The purpose of punishment should be deterrence, both general and specific. General deterrence in the sense that other people will see the punishment you receive and be less likely to commit that action. And in specific, you yourself will be less likely to commit another action like that because you were punished for your behaviors. One very exciting time in American history was the Industrial Revolution. It was a time of great innovation and great change. And all of a sudden, people from largely agricultural communities, very small, tight-knit communities, found themselves migrating to very large inner cities. And when they moved to these inner cities, they started engaging in criminal behaviors, violent behaviors, behaviors they would have never engaged in before they came to the inner city. And what we seen that was even stranger was, as they moved out of the inner city, they got more income, more resources, and they moved out of the inner city into the suburbs, into the zone of transition, into the commuter zone, etc. They left behind their criminal ways. This can't be a biological thing because it's biologically the same person that lived in the farm as it was the person that lived in the inner city that lived in the commuter zone. So there must be something in the environment that's causing people to act this way. Well, Sean McKay did this research, and they came up with what we call the concentric zone theory, or the Chicago School of Criminology. Basically, what this theory says is that as people move into these inner cities, their rates of violence and criminal behavior tick up. And then once they move back out of these inner cities, it goes back down. On closer exploration of these facts, what we begin to see is there's several reasons why people in these communities are committing more violent criminal acts. For one thing, there's more social disorganization. Back in their home in the farm where they knew everybody and everybody knew them, there was a strong, tight-knit community that surrounded them and embraced them and helped them stay on the right track. In the inner city, that really wasn't the way that it was. You were in the inner city with a lot of other people who came from all over the world to take part in this industrial revolution. And there was a lot of culture clash, a lot of problems in communication, and you didn't have that strong support system to back you up and help you make it through hard times. It was also a great lie that was instituted on a lot of people who entered these inner cities. There was a belief that if I come to these inner cities and I take part in this industrial revolution, it's going to mean great things for me and my family. It's going to mean opportunities for us to have a greater economic standing, to provide better food for our children, provide better education, better resources, all kinds of things like that. And what they found oftentimes when they got into the inner cities was they were living in slums that were about to fall down, in a lot of cases would be condemned under other circumstances. They were getting paid a lot of times in script and not money. And script was something that we've seen in coal camps in the early 20th century in a lot of our areas, where the coal company would basically pay you in what was called script instead of cash. And script was only good at company stores and company-owned rental properties, and you basically had to spend in your livelihood paying the company for everything that you wanted, because your money wasn't good anywhere else. And so if you wanted food, you had to go to the company store that mocked up the price 10 times. If you wanted to live in a house, well, you had to pay the rent or whatever that the company said you had to pay. And you didn't make the wages to make those payments, and so you became indebted to the company rather quickly. And no matter how hard you worked, no matter how hard you tried, you could not make enough money to really survive. And you were always in debt to the company. And that was a way to keep you in that employment. It was so bad that in order to keep food on the table and to keep shelter over your house, it wasn't enough that both parents worked. Young children had to go to work as well. We've seen young kids, 8, 9 years old, going to coal mines, going into factories, and they would push them into areas like inside of factory equipment that adults couldn't get into, and have them go and work in there and fix things. And a lot of times they would get mutilated or harmed or maybe even killed. There was not a lot of labor laws or standards at this time. And so this was another problem. A lot of people felt trapped. They felt like there was no way to get out of this situation. And so they had that frustration on them. They didn't have the support system that they had before. They also had issues with, how am I going to live in a community where violence is a thing that happens every day? It's always around me. It becomes normal. It just becomes part of everyday life. It seems like everything is built to keep me from being able to succeed. Instead of giving me a chance at success and climbing a ladder of success, everything's designed to keep me in poverty and keep me here. In those cases, people might look for other opportunities to supplement their income. Things like robbery, things like fraud, to try to get an upper leg so that they can get out of this inner city. Now, when you got lucky enough to get out of the inner city, a strange thing happened that we already talked about. People who were violent and criminal inside the inner city once again became pro-social and good upstanding citizens. People made more money the farther you moved away from the inner city. Cost more money to go back and forth. But it also allowed for more taxes and ability to have better schools, better social programs, better after-school activities, and all the rest. And so you begin to see that social structure begin to recreate in a different way. And all those insulations from criminal activity were starting to develop outside of the inner city. And so the inner city was kind of like this oasis of poverty. Strain theory basically says that when people are under unnecessary strain, they act out in ways that they wouldn't ordinarily act out. That sometimes strain pushes people to a point where they feel no other hope but to engage in a behavior they wouldn't have ordinarily found themselves engaging in. In the American society, we have an ideal of what people are supposed to achieve in their life, and we call it the American dream. They're supposed to have home ownership. They're supposed to have a nice car. They're supposed to be able to take their kids on vacation every year, and they're supposed to have this nice bank account for safety. And not everybody has the ability to reach that same goal. Bill Gates' kids have a lot better opportunity to achieve that goal. They already have money. They already have wealth. They have opportunities to go to the best schools in the country. They have opportunities to meet CEOs and business leaders all over the world, which create contacts for future employment. They have a lot of benefits associated with that wealth and that power. Turn to the other side of the coin. A person who's raised homeless and is fighting for that next little bit of food and worried about where the next meal comes from may not even have time to learn how to read and write and do basic and have a basic education. And so they're at a great disadvantage. But in America, we don't accept no excuses. You know, you pull up your bootstraps and you go out there and you work hard and you'll be rewarded. And if you're not rewarded, it's your fault. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't do something to be successful. Well, when we create a system like that, it puts strains on individuals who may not be able to achieve what we say is success in the way that we say you have to achieve it, through hard work, going to school, opening businesses, and the like. And so nobody wants to feel like a failure, and so they have to come up with some mechanism of dealing with this stress. And according to Merton, there's 5 different ways people can deal with this stress. The first is they can accept the institutional goals. They can say, all right, success is the white picket fence home, the car, the bank account, the vacations, and all the rest. And I'm also going to accept that there's institutional means for me to be able to achieve that success. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to get a good job. And I'm going to do all the things I need to do to be amazingly successful in this life. And it's going to happen. Other people agree that the cultural ideal of what is success is a reality, in that that is what success looks like. The nice house, the nice cars, and all that. But they also understand that under the mechanisms we have, the institutional mechanisms for achieving that success, they're never going to make it, or at least that's how they feel. They see too many obstacles, too many things in the way, too many things blocking their path. Maybe, you were an all-star student at your school, but the school you went to wasn't highly ranked enough and didn't have enough extracurricular activities, and so you didn't get into the Ivy League schools that lead to the Ivy League jobs. And you just feel like there's too much against you. And so you decide to come up with some other way to achieve the American dream. And so you innovate. You start selling drugs, you start doing fraud, you start doing things to give yourself that level of success, to make sure your children are dressed nice and that you have a nice car to take to school and those types of things. Some people are ritualists. Ritualists basically, they know that they're never going to be successful. That's just not something that's ever in their stars. But they're also unwilling to come up with any other way besides the approved institutional means of trying to achieve success. And so these people will go to work every day knowing it's not going to get any better, knowing no matter what they do, their life is never going to be successful, and they just go through the ritual. Other individuals will instead retreat from society. They'll basically say, you know what, I'm never going to be a success. There's no sense in trying. I'm just going to check out. Other individuals are rebels, and these are the individuals who create their own identity of what is successful and their own way of achieving that success. You see this a lot in gang membership and things like that, where success is less, especially early on, less about a house and a car, and it's more about respect within the gang membership. And how do you achieve that? Their institutional means would be through violence and intimidation. Control theory basically says that societies are always in a state of conflict, and that's a good thing. That's how change happens. People get comfortable, change doesn't happen. You see something wrong, something that's not just, you speak out about it and you let your voice be heard. You protest peacefully, you do those things, and society changes as a result. Some people have power in this conflict, some people don't. Those in power are your senators, your governors, your presidents, and those that don't are the people who have to follow the rules that the other people in power make. And sometimes those rules made by people in power are contrary to the beliefs and ideals of the people who are the followers. And so when those conflicts become too extreme, they can become violent, and then criminal behavior and violence can ensue. Control theory basically says that we're all evil little hedonistic individuals, just waiting to commit crime and violence on other people in order to attain more things for ourselves. And it's society's place to put in conditions that will keep us from engaging in the criminal behavior that we want to engage in the first place. And so society has created these mechanisms to keep people's problem behaviors in check. If I'm attached to people in the community, my family, my friends, I'm less likely to commit crimes because I don't want to hurt them and I don't want to be taken away from them. I know if I commit a crime, I go to jail, I'm not with my kids, I'm not with my family. I know that if I commit this crime, it might hurt my grandmother or my mother, and that's something that I just can't bring myself to do. And so that creates a bond to society that keeps me from committing crimes. Another one is commitment to society. If I'm committed to my community, I'm less likely to engage in crime. So if I have a career that I've worked really hard, I went to school, I've worked years to get into this position, why would I want to mess it up by doing something stupid and going to jail and losing my job? If I'm a very important person in my community, let's say I'm a pastor at a church, it's a very influential church in my community, I know if I'm caught doing the wrong thing, then that could look bad on myself and harm the community because they look up to me and they look to me for guidance. Belief is another bonding mechanism we have in society. These are the morals and the values that are taught to you from your childhood. These are the ideas that people should act in a socially acceptable way. People should care for each other. People should love each other. People shouldn't be engaging in violent behavior. If my belief structure is strong enough and I've internalized it well enough, that can create a pretty good protection from me committing crimes because it goes against the very fabric of who I am. And the last one is involvement. It goes back to the old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop. If I have free time, I'm going to find non-productive ways to engage in behaviors during that free time. And so it's good to stay busy. It's good to stay busy doing nonprofit work. If you're in school, we put kids in after-school programs and things like that to keep them busy, to get them committed to something else. The busier you are doing pro-social activities, the less time you have to engage in criminal behaviors. When these social bonds break down, it's like a dam that starts leaking water. As long as the dam construction is solid, the town below is safe. But once they start getting leaks in the dam and water starts seeping through, it starts pouring more and more until the town is flooded. Same way with this. When some of these social bonds start breaking down, it creates a little bit of a pour out of the dam that society has created. And over time, more and more of your evil, natural self will pour through if these bonds are not upkept and kept strong.